Hi, welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day and that it is going swimmingly and most definitely going your way. Now, on Facebook the other day, a couple of designs popped up in my Facebook memories from several years ago, and I had several people asking me if I would show you how to make them. So there's a couple of variations using the same basic technique for snowflake designs. Now, these are great at festive times of the year. They make beautiful tree ornaments, but they're also really pretty to use the basic design. You can either use it for a spider web, or you can change that up and put it in your window decor, or perhaps the wind chimes that people enjoy for outside usage, or even, as I say, in window decor. So there's lots of ways that you can use the basic technique. It's not just for festive snowflakes, although they are really cool at this time of year. So the materials we're going to use are copper core. In this instance, I have got a frosty silver colour. It's really quite pretty, and that's in 1mm gauge, which translates to 18 gauge, and also 0.4mm gauge, which translates to 26 gauge. So those are your two basic wires. On this piece, I've added in some Swarovski crystals in 8mm bicones, so you can add those on if that is your choice. Otherwise, you've got quite a nice little open design to work with. So let's get on with what we need to use. So for those two pieces, they actually use the same amount of wire basically, which are 6 lengths, approximately 5 inches or so in length, and you need 6 of those, and they need to be bent centrally to look like this. Now, you could, if you wanted to, use a protractor to get that set square kind of exact preciseness, but what I've done is I've just prepared these by eye, and I'll show you how to get them all looking very similar in just a moment. So here is my 5-inch length of 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and it pays to just get this as straight as possible. This is directly off the reel a moment ago. So what I tend to do, even with coated wire, you can be quite careful and just straighten that up a little bit, and any kinks, it makes your life so much easier if you get shot of them at this stage of your design. So what we're going to do is give that a little bit of warmth, make sure it's nice and smooth and as clean as possible. And we're going to find the central point. Now, you can use a ruler because it saves time later. So we're going to find the 2.5-inch, and I'm going to put a nice sharp bend in with these banding pliers. So just to get that sharp beginning. And I'm going to use very, very broad pliers to support one of those angles, and then just push the wire around until I can draw that to approximately the angle that we're looking for. So 1/6 of the 360 degrees to make that up. Now, if I just pop these down, you'll see how you can get this by eye, and then I'll show you how you can make sure that all of those lengths are exactly the same length using nothing more than a ruler and your cutters. So if we just line these up, we'll see that most of them are pretty reasonable. We're leaving a space in the centre there, but there's just this one is slightly out at the top. So what we're going to do is drop them all over the ruler, and this is where, if they're straight to begin with, it really helps. So we're going to drop them over a steel rule and allow them to all sit into position, and just push them really hard into that rule. Just trying to keep that in focus where possible. Pushing that down into position. Now you can see the ones that I did earlier versus the one that I've just added now. So I'm just going to use my flush cutters to make the flush side all line up. So we're going to turn that around now and make sure that they all fit. So there's minute discrepancies between some of them, and I'm not going to overly worry about that, but we're just going to trim that last one so that it matches and everything is equal to begin with. So let's pop the ruler out of the way. And as I say, what you would need to do is just make sure that those angles are very similar. And it's just opening and closing them gently until they sit neatly in 1/6 of that full circle. So that by eye looks pretty good to me. As I say, you could raid your mathematician's pencil case and see if you've got the materials needed to get that exact and precise, but you don't absolutely have to. So to get these all joined up together, what we need to do is keep our wire on the spool, because we're not entirely sure how big we want the snowflake to be. But once you've seen the basic technique, all that it will remain to do is pop some coils on the end for this initial design. So to start with, it's a little bit fiddly and it wants to get away from you. But what we're going to do is wrap the wire around 2 separate sections. We're going to start drawing them together like so. Try to bring those into a neat line-up point. And I'm just going to wrap twice around those 2. And what we will do is just leave that tail for a second because it gives us something to grip onto. I'm just going to pull the spool of wire onto the other side because I'm right dominant. Now, where we have got our finer gauge wire coming over the top of those 2 legs, it's now going to go underneath the next segment. I'm going to just pull that down towards the centre. We're now going to bring in our next V-shaped section and drop that into position. And what I want to do is circle back around those next 2 legs that are separate V sections. So I'm coming underneath all the way around. Now I'm going to go over the top, and for this design to catch light the way that it does, we're going to go up and down and up and down. In some of these designs you can go up on one and then down on the next one, but for this to work and catch the light, we're now going to bring in our next V section. My fine gauge wire is coming over the top, so we're going to allow the next piece to come into position, grip those 2 legs side by side, and then wrap all the way around over the top. Keep that nice and taut where you can, getting that close down to the centre. It's very fiddly to begin with, but absolutely worth it and much easier in just a moment. So we're going to wrap all the way around, and what you will see as you build up this weave is that you've got 2 over the top, and then 1 over the top, and then 2 over the top. So my finer gauge wire is coming over the top of the 2 we've just completed. Therefore, I want it to come underneath the next one. So I'm going to bring in my next V-shaped section and drop that over the top. Finer gauge wire has come underneath, so it's going to go all the way around both of those and then up to go over the next section. So we're now ready to bring our last V-shaped segment into position. So I'm going to drop that in and get that lined up as closely as possible. So we're going over the top of these 2 segments, all the way around, as close to that central section as possible, and over the top again. So at this point, we're almost back to the beginning, and we really want to get rid of that naughty little bit that we left hanging to begin with. So I'm just going to trim that away. Hold this all in position. You've got, if I just pop it down on the board, you'll see what we've done so far. And as I say, it is a little bit feisty to begin with. So we're going over and under, over and under. So for this last segment to join in, we're going to go back over the top, push that around. So we're going to come underneath the next 2 legs of the snowflake design. So all the way around once, and then because we're coming from underneath, we need to go over the top of the next one. So you will want to hide away that end where we started. Just give that a bit of a squeeze, tuck it away. So all you will do is continue on and on, going round and round in circles. So we're coming from underneath here, so we're going over the top once and twice in the same direction. Moving on to the next leg, because we're on top of those 2 legs here, we're going underneath, all the way around and in the same direction. So we've come underneath, going around, so we must go over the top for the next one. And at this point, it starts to tie together. So we're going to go over, over, under, under, tying those 2 sections together. And if you've found that they're not quite straight, then you can kind of modify that as you're going along. So coming from underneath, that means we have to go over the top, and we're pushing those 2 legs side by side, and we're just going to continue for a little while until it starts to take shape. Always switching from underneath to over the top, and always banding 2 sections of wire from different V shapes together. Now when you start moving through, it will become apparent if you have allowed any shapes to be imperfect, and when it starts biting, you may need to just make sure that those are exactly the right angles, all the way around, underneath, over. I'm doing this very, very quickly and roughly because I want to show you how quickly and satisfyingly it can build up. So we're always looking to keep these two separate V sections taut and together. So it will, in the end, start to build up a really nice design for you, and it will become a little bit easier to handle. So I'm just going to stop there for a second and assess what we've done. Now this is the point in time that you can see that those V points are not quite lining up. So you can just give those a bit of a push and a pull and make sure that everything meets in the centre. Obviously, if you can do that from the very beginning, all the better, but it is quite tricky to hang on to begin with. But you'll see that it's reasonably easy just to push everything back into position. And then you can continue on your merry way weaving up a little snowflake. So I'm going to do another couple of turns and just show you how quickly it can form. And then I'm going to stop talking in a moment and we shall speed through the next segment. So here we are coming back towards where we want to finish up, and I'm just going to stop here. I've chosen where I want to finish off. I'm going to wrap a couple of times around, making sure that it matches the neater side that we started with. Trim away and squish down your excess wire at the back there. Now what you can do is take some nice flat pliers and just squeeze very, very gently on those two sections side by side, and it gives you this really lovely effect. Make sure that you're not damaging anything. This is a real benefit to having box joint pliers. You're unlikely to trap and damage. Now occasionally the weaving, because we're working with 1mm 18 gauge wire, these can move around a little bit and you might end up with a little bit of flex, but overall the pattern is really pretty. Very, very gently just squeezing down on those. So all that remains really is for us to add a hanging loop at the top and then some coils at each end of the spoke. So I'm going to show you how to do one of those now, and then we'll look at the alternative design with those crystals included. So back down at the board now, I need my round nose pliers, which have disappeared to the far end of my desk. And what I'm going to do is, because the way I've set these slightly off, I'm just going to trim away a tiny bit at the end where things don't exactly match up. And I'll pick those up later. And I'm going to choose the section where we ended and we have those two last little wraps. That's going to be my hanging loop. So I'm just going to splay apart the ends on all of these, but I'll just show you how to do one of them, like so. And we're going to make the coil as we normally would. So one going in one direction, flipping over to view the back for the next moment, going away in the opposite direction like so. And then you can use any flat facing pliers just to draw those coils round into nice neat coils like so. Now I like to have them just snuggling down over the surface of the design. If you prefer, you can keep those elevated from the very edges like so. It's entirely up to you. I quite like to have them, as I say, coming down over the face because it defines which direction I want to hang them in, and I know exactly which is going to be the neatest face without having to mess around too much. So just to create a little hanging loop, I have a short length of very similar wire. I'm just going to bend that into approximate halves, trim that away so that they're reasonably equal, and then just turn some bends on the ends like so, making sure that they're approximately the same length from the bend in the centre. Give that a bit of a squeeze because that will need a little bit of strength to carry the design neatly. And then we're just going to pop those through the centre of our coils. Take a look at the back. You can see that you can just grab those end sections and draw them around so that they close up. That's the one side. And then on the second side, you can do exactly the same thing like so, and just push them down so that they're not going to come loose easily. Make sure that that sits neatly. and then you can line them up so that those ends are hidden from the front. You won't get to see any of that. So let's just give that a bit of a squeeze, and exactly the same on the far side before flipping it over. So that is the first design made up, your snowflake design. You can do what you want with the coils. You can bring them to a single point and have them on a single hanging hook if you prefer. Now the second design uses just 3 of those V shapes that we made, and I will show you how to do that just now. So for our second snowflake design, we're going to start in much the same way, but instead of creating 6 little V shapes out of wire, we're going to create 3. So if you join me down at the board, I'll show you how to work that all together. So I've got my 3 formed V shapes, and they are exactly the same angle. They're each 1/6 of the full 360 degrees. So you're actually using slightly less wire for this design than you are for the other. And we're still going to be working with our finer gauge wire. So the heavier V-shaped pieces, the 1mm 18 gauge pieces for this. And then we're going to be adding in some 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire. So I'm going to start by wrapping a couple of times around the base of one of those V's. Now to make your life easier, you can wrap twice around slightly higher up. I'm just going to smooth that away so it doesn't catch on anything. Get that end nice and smooth, and then draw those 2 coils together. And then you can slide that down closer to the centre. It just makes your life slightly easier. So what we're going to do now, my finer gauge wire is coming over the top of the first segment. So I'm going to hold that piece in position, and we're going to imagine that 1/6 gap between those 2 V forms. So I'm going to go underneath, wrap all the way around, and then up and over the next section. So for this one, we're going to wrap all the way around like so, and then continue in the same direction. And then we're going to add our 3rd piece into position. It is, again, rather fiddly to get started. Once you drop those into position, it will start to get better. So I'm coming over the top of this section. So that means I need to come underneath the next one. Wrap all the way around so that it shows once. Push that down slightly if you need to. Over the top of the next section, and it's going to work in exactly the same way, but you're just wrapping 1 leg at a time rather than 2 segments together. So gripping with my non-dominant hand, I'm going to wrap all the way around. I've come over the top, then underneath and around, trying to keep those V shapes central if you can, all the way around the next section, and then here, just pushing those down so that they are getting nice and snuggled up against one another. Once it starts to build, it will become slightly easier to handle. It's this initial section which is a little bit tricky, and it will want to move apart. So I'm coming from underneath, so I've gone over the top here, all the way around, underneath the next one, and you can do this kind of thing without too much concentration, because once you get into a rhythm, you kind of get muscle memory. It's a little bit like knitting for experienced knitters. I'm not a knitter. Both my mother and my grandmother have tried to teach me. I can do the middle bit, but I can't do the casting on or off, so it's not for everyone, much like wire work, I imagine. Now I can see there's a bit of a bend here, so I'm just going to get that a little bit straighter before we move on. So over the top and underneath, and in exactly the same way. It's rather dull, honestly, but it does build up, and you can just make sure that those V sections are joining together in the middle. They do tend to shift around a little bit, but after a little bit of work, they will start to form into that lovely, familiar and evenly spaced snowflake that we're looking for. So I'm going to do another couple of rows, which I think will probably speed through again. So I'm just going to do a couple more twists and turns on this one before I think about what we're going to do next. And here I've got a selection of spare Swarovski crystal beads that I found lingering. So we're going to see if this medium size will fit on my 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and it does, which is good news because I didn't have very many of the large ones left. So what I've done is I've come over the top of this leg, all the way around. What I'm going to do here is just skirt around the bead and just keep that nice and neat. So my wire has come around that bicone form. So I'm going to draw that finer gauge wire is coming over the top. So we're going to introduce another bead like so. My eyes are not the best. There we go. So my wire's come over the top, therefore it needs to go underneath the next one, nice and taut, so that we're creating a good straight line here. Adding in another bicone. These are 6 mils from underneath, so it must go over the top. And you can see I'm using my nail to support that leg so that I can get tension in the wire. Just drawing that down slightly until I get the next bead in. Like so, over the top, so underneath the next one. Next bead, and you can add as many or as few of these as you wish. I'll show you the sample in just a second. One more to create that full circle. Over the top, underneath, and then all the way around. Now, what I've done in the example here is I've stopped at one bead going all the way around the edges, and then just done a little bit of gizmoing coming up to the top, and then a little wrapped loop. Now that looks quite effective, and I'll show you how to finish the ends. It's really just a coil which I've drawn round behind the beads, which gives it a really lovely kind of backdrop for them. Now you don't have to do that, you can leave them sticking out, which looks really quite attractive by itself. But when I was looking at this earlier, I kind of thought I liked them sitting behind like so. I just like the way it looks. You've got almost a halo of silvery wire behind those bicones. You can, of course, just have little coils coming out at the end. Now what you could do, if you wanted to, is a couple of rows continuing around in exactly the same pattern. Because I've got a few of these beads, I'm going to do a couple of these little rows like so. Exactly the same formation as we've been doing all the way along, whether we're using the double with the 6 V sections or the single with the 3 V sections. We're just going to build up until we come back when we've got the same number of strands strung between each leg. So at this point there are 4 strands. So what you can do if you wanted to is add on another bead, and we'll see what that looks like, whether we like it or not. I'm going to take that wire all the way around. Introduce another bead. So this is just a variation that I'm doing really on the fly. I hadn't planned it, but I think it would look quite nice, so let's run with it. So wire is coming from underneath, which means on the next prong or leg it needs to be going over the top. You're always switching. The reason I choose to do this instead of going from top to top and then from bottom to bottom, for instance, is that you get angles on the wire that you wouldn't otherwise get, which means that it reflects light in different directions, which when you're looking at shiny snowflake designs, I think is actually quite attractive. But of course, you are the master of your design, so you can choose exactly how you wish that to appear. So I'm just going to go for one more, and then we're just going to spin around a couple of times, like so. Make that nice and neat and tidy. One of the things that happens with your finer gauge wire, because I'm not allowing it to twist, I'm gripping it quite firmly, it gets rather stressed, which is why I only use a tiny amount at a time. Because once this wire is round the core, my finer gauge wire has been wrapped around the core, it doesn't really have to ever move again, which means I am allowed to put a little bit of stress on it. It's nothing too serious. We're then just going to pop a wrapped loop up here. And then these other sections I would bring back down with my round nose pliers, and we'll just have a look and see which we actually prefer. So I'm going to pop a coil just here. Now if you wanted that to sit on the outside but be centralised, you just need to very carefully support your crystal and then draw that back into position. What we could do as an alternative, and I'll show you that now, is add another coil on the end of each of those prongs or legs. I'm going to draw that all the way around now. Pull it so that it is centralised, and then I think I do actually quite like the idea of those having a little wire halo behind them. So imagine that with a wrapped loop at the top. It's actually quite pretty. A little bit spiderwebby, a little bit snowflakey, but with the basic technique, you're really the master of your own destiny. You can create whatever kind of design you like with this. So I hope that you've enjoyed this technique, and I hope that you keep well, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thank you for continuing to watch even. Take care. Bye bye.